I want you to think back for a second. Have you ever had a roommate who is just this unapologetic, obnoxious morning person?
Oh, we all have.
Right, like you know the exact scenario. You're curled up in your blankets, your metabolism hasn't quite kicked in yet. You just want, I don't know, 10 more minutes of sleep. And they are already aggressively cheerful.
Pulling the blankets off.
Exactly, ripping the curtains open, dragging you into the day way before your body is biologically ready for it.
It's actually a profound physiological mismatch because you have one organism operating at like peak metabolic efficiency and another that is desperately trying to conserve energy and heat.
And that mismatch, that is the perfect lens for the source material we are diving into today. Except in the scenario for this deep dive, the obnoxious morning roommate isn't a person.
No, it's a bird.
Yeah, a southern yellow-billed hornbill. And the reluctant sleeper isn't you in a cozy apartment. It's a family of banded mongooses hiding deep inside an abandoned termite mound on the African savannah.
Which is just such a wild visual.
It really is. So we are looking at a stack of field observations today that completely dismantle the standard textbook narrative of survival of the fittest. Our mission today is to trace how three radically different species have engineered this interconnected, highly coordinated survival network.
Yeah, a network that operates way more like a complex local economy than, a biological battlefield.
Right, because I feel like we always hear about the battlefield.
We do, and honestly, the term survival of the fittest has done a massive disservice to our understanding of ecology. It trains us to look for solo dominance, like who has the biggest teeth or the thickest armor.
The apex predator stuff.
Exactly. But when you examine the behavioral economics of these specific interactions on the savannah, you realize that evolutionary success is heavily, heavily mathematically weighted towards symbiosis.
Hey, working together.
Yes. We're looking at resource management, asymmetrical risk assessment, and caloric trading, all playing out in real time.
Well, okay, let's unpack this because the mechanics of this morning routine are just brilliant. During the colder months, these mongoose families sleep in the deep subterranean networks of old termite mounds.
Right, because the architecture of a termite mound, it acts like a thermal battery. It holds onto the Earth's ambient heat.
And obviously, the mongooses want to stay in that thermal refuge. It's warm, but the hornbill is already awake. Its avian metabolism is burning hot, and it requires breakfast.
So the bird essentially forces a disruption of that thermal refuge. I mean, its entire morning foraging strategy is inextricably linked to the mongooses waking up and becoming active.
And the way it does this is hilarious. The bird lands at the entrance of the mound and literally starts tossing dirt straight into the hole.
Just excavate.
Yeah. It just scoops up soil with its massive bill and flings it inside. It's bombarding the mongooses until they get so irritated they are just forced to poke their little tired faces out into the cold air.
Which is funny.
Yeah.
But you also have to consider the energetic cost here. The hornbill is burning valuable calories to perform this excavation, which tells us that the return on investment, waking the mongooses up must be incredibly high.
High enough to do manual labor. But the thing is, the mongooses don't just spring out of bed and start hunting. Even after the bird is throwing dirt in their faces, they refuse to rush the process.
They take their time.
They really do. They emerge, but then they just sit around, they groom each other, they find a patch of sunlight and just spread out.
And that delay, it isn't just laziness. It is a strict biological necessity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as small mammals in a cold environment, they need ambient solar radiation to bring up their core temperature.
So they're literally charging their batteries in the sun.
Precisely. Jumping straight into a high-intensity foraging session without thermoregulating, it would cause a massive unsustainable spike in their metabolic rate. They're essentially waiting for their internal engines to warm up.
Okay, that makes sense. But before they finally move out, they engage in this incredibly bizarre behavior.
The handstand.
Yes. A mongoose will approach a branch or a rock, tip entirely forward onto its front paws, raise its hind legs straight up into the air, and walk on its hands.
It's quite the acrobatic feat.
It looks ridiculous. And they do it to wipe their scent glands as high up on the object as physically possible. I call it wearing elevator shoes, but, with smells.
That is actually a fantastic way to visualize it. What's fascinating here is that it's an olfactory illusion.
An illusion?
Yeah, so if you look at the chemical ecology of the savannah, scent marking is all about spatial mapping. The volatile compounds in those secretions, they convey a massive amount of data to a predator or a rival pack.
Like what kind of data?
Identity, health, and crucially size.
Oh, I see. So if a banded mongoose, which is, a fairly small animal, if it just squatted and marked the ground, a passing jackal or leopard would sniff it and immediately know they were dealing with something bite-sized.
Precisely. By performing that acrobatic handstand, the mongoose is altering the spatial distribution of its pheromones.
They're hacking the system.
They are hacking the sensory mapping of potential intruders. When a rival or a predator encounters a scent mark at eye level, their biological programming automatically recalibrates its threat assessment.
So the brain registers the height of the chemical signature and just assumes like a much larger, potentially dangerous animal claims this territory.
Exactly. They are projecting a hologram of a bigger predator using chemistry.
That is so smart.
They have to be. Physical size is a distinct disadvantage for the mongoose, so they utilize chemical warfare and sensory manipulation to secure their home base while they're out exposing themselves on the open plains.
Which brings us to the actual hunt, because once the solar radiation has warmed them up and the optical illusions are set, the mongooses finally start moving, and their foraging mechanism is intense.
It's very specialized.
They possess this profound olfactory acuity. It allows them to detect prey buried deep beneath the soil. But they aren't just looking for, like, earthworms. They are actively hunting scorpions, massive centipedes, and venomous spiders.
And this is where their specific evolutionary adaptations really shine. They have developed a remarkable resistance to neurotoxins.
Which is wild.
It functions at a cellular level, likely through mutations in their nerve receptors that actually prevent the venom's molecules from binding effectively.
So they can afford to take a sting that would paralyze another animal.
Right.
And that allows them to exploit a highly caloric food source that most other predators on the savannah just refuse to touch.
It opens up an entirely exclusive nutritional niche for them. They essentially have a monopoly on the most dangerous insects in the dirt.
But as they furiously dig for these scorpions, they are tearing up the topsoil. I mean, they are causing absolute chaos. Harmless beetles, lizards, and crickets get flushed out and scatter in every direction to escape the digging.
And the hornbill is right there.
Yes, hovering over the chaos, using its long bill to just snatch up all the fleeing collateral damage. Now, I have to challenge this setup for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
From a behavioral standpoint, this looks like straight-up kleptoparasitism. I mean, the mongooses are burning massive amounts of caloric energy excavating the soil, they're risking venomous strikes, and the bird is just swooping in and stealing the profit. Why on earth do the mongooses tolerate this freeloader?
It's a vital question, and it's because human observation often overlays a moral framework like theft onto biological imperatives. We have to look at the behavioral economics of the strike radius.
The strike radius, what do you mean by that?
Well, when a mongoose is digging, it is hyper-focused on the primary target, say a large scorpion. Its cognitive and physical bandwidth is entirely occupied.
Right, they're busy fighting a scorpion.
Exactly. So these smaller insects that scatter outward, beyond the mongoose's immediate physical reach, they are already biologically lost to them. It would actually cost the mongoose more energy to abandon the primary excavation, chase down a single fleeing beetle, and then resume digging than they would gain from eating the beetle.
Ah, okay, so they aren't actually losing capital.
No, not at all. The hornbill is simply capitalizing on the biological exhaust of the mongoose's labor.
The exhaust, I like that.
But to answer your question about tolerance, the mongooses aren't just passively accepting this. They are paying a deliberate tax. They surrender that outer ring of escaping insects to the bird, because they are purchasing a service that is infinitely more valuable to their survival.
The OACS system.
The airborne warning and control system, yes.
So if you think about the physical posture of a foraging mongoose, their snout is buried in the dirt, their focal length is optimized for something like 6 inches in front of their face, which means they have a massive fatal blind spot.
They are completely oblivious to the sky. Mammalian binocular vision simply cannot process a microfocus task in the dirt and simultaneously scan a macro environment like the open horizon. They just lack the ocular anatomy for it.
And the airspace above the African savanna is highly contested. The source material highlights the martial eagle, which is an apex aerial predator. These eagles, they attack from high altitudes, often using the glare of the sun to mask their approach.
So if a mongoose tries to look up, it's already too late.
Exactly. But the hornbill possesses a completely different visual system.
Yes, avian vision incorporates a high flicker fusion rate and a much wider lateral field of view.
And they have a better vantage point, right?
Oh, absolutely. The hornbill's physical position, usually perched on a low branch or standing tall just outside the dust cloud of the dig, it makes it an unparalleled early warning radar.
And it is fast. The moment the hornbill's ocular anatomy detects the silhouette of that eagle, it triggers a biological override. It lets out a series of urgent, rapid acoustic signals and beats its wings heavily against the air.
A very distinct alarm.
And the mongooses, they don't even look up to verify the threat.
Because they can't afford to verify. Verification costs seconds, and seconds dictate mortality.
Wow. So the entire family instantly abandons the hunt. They sprint for the nearest subterranean shelter and just vanish. And they stay down there until the hornbill switches its acoustic signaling.
The all clear.
Right. Once the eagle moves on, the bird issues a series of soft, low-frequency clucks. The mongooses emerge and immediately resume digging as if nothing happened.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, just consider the mathematical elegance of this trade for a moment.
It's pretty amazing.
For the hornbill, Emitting an acoustic alarm call costs fractions of a single calorie. It is an energetically negligible action. But for the mongoose, attempting to maintain aerial vigilance themselves would cost them massive amounts of lost foraging time, severely reducing their caloric intake.
So they essentially outsource their security so they can maintain 100% operational efficiency on the ground?
Exactly. And in return for acting as a sentinel, the bird gets a mobile, heavy-duty excavation team that unearths food it could never access on its own.
It is a flawless mutualistic pact.
Born out of sheer pragmatism.
But the flexibility of this system is what really caught my attention. The hornbill is clearly calibrated to aerial threats, but what happens when the threat vector changes?
That's where it gets dynamic.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source material details a moment where the hornbill stops feeding, flies to a higher vantage point, and issues a completely different alarm call.
A terrestrial warning rather than an aerial one.
Right. So the mongooses, conditioned by the system, immediately sprig for the termite mound. The alpha mongoose is scanning the grass, probably expecting a leopard or a pack of wild dogs.
Sure.
But then it spots the source of the alarm. It's a massive warthog approaching through the brush, and instantly the dynamic inverts. The hornbill drops the alarm call. And the mongooses, they don't hide. They sprint directly toward the warthog.
And to understand why a tiny carnivore would run toward a massive herbivore that could easily crush it with a single misstep, you have to look at the parasitology of the warthog.
The mud problem. Because warthogs live in an environment with brutal UV radiation and relentless biting flies, like the tsetse fly.
And they don't have thick fur.
Right, so they regulate their body temperature and protect their skin by wallowing in mud.
The mud dries into a keratinized armor. It is a highly effective physical barrier against the sun and flies.
But as that mud bakes and cracks in the heat, it creates these deep fissures and folds on the warthog's body. And those crevices become a perfect microenvironment for ectoparasites.
Specifically ticks.
Nasty.
And a warthog lacks the physical dexterity to groom itself efficiently. It can't reach into those hardened mud cracks to remove engorged ticks. So, left unchecked, the parasite load becomes a massive physiological burden, vectoring diseases and really draining the animal's energy reserves.
Enter the mongooses. They treat the warthog like a walking buffet. The source describes them just swarming the animal, climbing up its legs, balancing on its shoulders, even scaling its neck.
It's quite a sight.
They use their specialized dentition, those incredibly sharp little teeth, to act like surgical tweezers. They meticulously pull the ticks out of the mud cracks and eat them.
It is a highly specialized extraction process. For the mongooses, this is the ultimate prize. They're securing high-protein, calorie-dense nutrition with zero excavation effort and obviously zero risk of venomous retaliation.
And the warthog just stands completely still, actively facilitating the grooming. It leans into it, exposing its neck and belly to let the mongooses access the worst infestations.
It is essentially a spa treatment for the warthog. The reduction in its parasite load directly correlates to an increase in its overall biological fitness and its lifespan.
But let's bring it back to the hornbill for a second, because the bird hasn't left the scene. It's still perched above this bizarre spa session.
This raises an important question about how ecosystems cascade. The hornbill doesn't eat ticks, so why stay?
Right.
Well, a warthog is a heavy, disruptive animal. When it arrives and shifts its weight around to let the mongooses groom it, it heavily disturbs the surrounding vegetation.
Oh, so it fleshes out a whole new wave of prey, like grasshoppers, large moths, things hiding in the tall grass.
Exactly. And the hornbill capitalizes on that secondary flush. We are looking at a tripartite mutualistic web. 3 distinct evolutionary lineages, a bird, a small carnivore, and a large herbivore, all converging in a localized temporary ecosystem engineered entirely by their cooperative behavior.
It's incredible. The herbivore provides a static feeding platform, the carnivore provides a biological cleaning service, and the bird provides an early warning radar, allowing the whole system to operate safely while skimming the disturbed insects off the top.
And no single entity in that triangle is losing. It challenges our fundamental assumptions about natural selection. We are taught that the natural world is a zero-sum game, right? A ruthless competition for finite resources.
Yeah, eat or be eaten.
But this interaction proves that nature fiercely rewards organisms that can integrate into a network. The absolute greatest strength an organism can possess in a hostile environment isn't dominance, it is utility.
The capacity to make yourself indispensable to another species.
Exactly. When you strip away the romanticized idea of the lone apex predator, you find that the foundation of a healthy ecosystem is built on these complex, overlapping dependencies. The organisms that survive the longest are the ones that learn how to trade.
That is a profound shift in perspective. It really makes you realize how many of these intricate deals are happening right under our noses, completely invisible to us, unless we know the exact mechanisms to look for.
You just have to know where to look.
So what does this all mean? Well, I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's deep dive. We've just dismantled the illusion of the solitary survivor on the African plains. But this principle of interconnected utility, it scales up to almost every complex system we operate in.
That's very true.
Next time you are looking at a seemingly chaotic environment, whether it's a bustling city ecosystem, a complex digital network, or even, the underlying structures of your own community or workplace, ask yourself, where are the invisible trades happening? Who is providing the early warning radar and who is doing the heavy excavation? Because if you look closely enough past the noise of the competition, you might just find that the strongest systems are entirely held together by the quiet, symbiotic deals happening just beneath the surface.